focuses on the Boltzmann box, which is typically a 3D box with particles in it. Throughout this, we'll be using a simplified version, 2D box. The reason we've done this is because it's quite nice for explaining what entropy is. A Boltzmann box is. The way you define entropy in a Boltzmann box is the amount of information required. So this box has a bunch of particles in it. Say it has 20 particles. You're very unlikely to know the exact position of those particles. It's called the microstate. Then T, 10 degrees Kelvin. So is the macrostate. And the entropy, so what is temperature? So it's actually a fact about the system at an abstract level. It's the amount of force essentially exerted by the particles when they collide with the walls. That's what entropy is. It is a number that is dependent on that, and that's what temperature is, right? And then entropy, denoted with S, is the volume of information required to take you from this temperature value to the microstate. Throughout this talk, we will use a simplified 2D diagram where we have an analogy of temperature, which is the number of boxes touching the edge. So temperature in the system is either 1 or 0, and it's denoted by the number of boxes, whether there are boxes touching the edge. Yes?
Sorry, so the amount of force exerted on the edges of the container would most naively be some kind of pressure. So I'm surprised you refer to it as temperature, or are you using some ideal gas law to argue that these are proportional or something?
They're all interdependent, obviously. So you have a microstate, and temperature is an abstract property of that system that is dependent on the number of particles that hit the edge of the wall and the velocity with which they hit.
So I would say that the energy is like, or like the temperature would be like the mean kinetic energy of the particles, and I would say the pressure is what you're describing. The force
kinetic energy, mass, and then velocity. So I was saying that. So yeah, you're 100% correct. The temperature is dependent on the mass and velocity of the particles at the wall. The main fact that I'm trying to say is that you have some microstate of particles, and then you take this, and then you calculate its temperature. It gives you information about this. So temperature of 10 degrees has a bunch of microstates that it may correspond to.
I assume you constant volume.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then it's basically the same. Yeah.
Perfect. So entropy, I always thought it was quite confusing in statistical mechanics, but information theory is where it kind of comes through a little bit. So the entropy of this system is 4 because you need to ask 4 questions in order to specify that this is the microstate. So you essentially have a macrostate of all possible boxes with 1 particle in them. How many questions do you need to ask in order to specify this? So you need to ask, is the particle on the right or the left? 1 question. It's on the right. Is the particle above or below? It's below. 2 questions. 3rd question is on the right. 4th question, it is above. That means that there are 4 binary questions to pinpoint the microstate from the macrostate. Now we have updating prior bed. That's kind of how I phrased it. So temperature equals 0 if the particle is not touching the edge of the box. Temperature equals 1 if it is touching the edge. The point here is that there are 4 possible microstates of temperature equals 0. So you need 2 bits of information. This is the formula. So this denotes the number of binary questions, or this denotes the fact that there are binary questions that you need to ask of 4 possible states. So there are 2 bits of information. Again, 2 questions to specify the microstate. Then if we consider the macrostate of temperature equals 1, then there are 12 possible microstates. Therefore, our entropy entropy formula gives us, we require 3.58 questions, essentially, in order to specify the microstate. That is what entropy is. The volume of information required for some transformation from microstate to microstate. Now we have the second law of thermodynamics. That is the law by Boltzmann that entropy increases. The number of microstates, each of these have equal probability. The number of microstates corresponding to this is fewer, so of equal probability. Within these states, your temperature will tend, your state will tend to have a temperature of 1. Yes?
If I was to understand microstates as possible states and macrostates as actual states, is that missing something? Am I missing something there? Is that like a kind of good analogy for it?
Macrostate is an abstract fact about a microstate.
About a set of microstates, or
So, yeah, so this has this single set, this single microstate has a corresponding macrostate of temperature equals 1.
So the bottom box is the microstate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the macrostate
Exactly.
is the position of the particle in that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like an abstract fact about this.
Excellent. Yeah.
So then there are 12 possible. So whenever you say the temperature equals 1, there are 12 possible microstates. Therefore, the entropy is log 2 to the 12, and it's 3.58. The second law is that entropy tends to increase almost by definition. The majority of transformations, if we say just change state, all I've done here is say put a random box. The majority of transformations will increase the entropy. So entropy always increases. That's the second law. Kelvin said it would never be disproven. Okay, so just a bit more intuition. People typically talk about entropy in terms of tidy rooms becoming untidy. Here, tidy is defined as when all the black boxes rest on the table. The majority of transformations do not result in such a microstate with the macrostate. So we start off in tidy, and it would eventually go back to tidy at some future state, but the problem is that this is the probability of that happening for any given transformation. It's pretty small probability, so it never happens, and there's 400 iterations here. Does everyone understand the concept? Any questions? Yeah.
So I guess I'm a little bit confused about why you talk about entropy increasing, because you're somehow already considering a system in thermal equilibrium in some way, no?
No, so I've just made it artificially the first state is guaranteed tidy. So
Yeah, okay. So the increase in entropy is from the first state to the second state,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
we're in thermal equilibrium.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, the entropy doesn't change once that state is.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely to change. Okay, but yeah, but the second law of thermodynamics just doesn't consider the idea of knowledge. And the talk yesterday was literally about the increase in complexity over time. It's not just association. There have been 3 papers essentially written on this over the last year. They created quite a stir. First one on assembly theory got 70,000 downloads in like the first week. There's another one about the law of increasing functional information, and then there's another one, the second law of infodynamics. All of these papers talk about how through time we have this process that appears completely random in a local sense, but there are convergent information structures that result in that space. We see this as in different continents. They may have been split like 180 million years ago, but you have convergence in evolution because the same niches exist. Therefore, there's something that goes against just a simple entropy always increases. And it's the fact that the current theory of entropy doesn't account for knowledge. So why do tidy rooms exist in the first place? Why is this place all clean if typically the theory of statistical mechanics would suggest that it doesn't? The answer is preferential selection of states. This is the, yeah. In our reality, the concept of knowledge is defined by the fact that knowledge is anything that tends to remain in a system once it is instantiated. In our example, the tidy room, which is just a configuration where all particles rest in the box, typically it would be dissociated from, but in this example we say it is preferentially selected. Preferential selection is something we already observe in reality, so we'll put in here, and once that happens, the probability of this microstate increases. And Shannon's formula, it's all about probability. So the thing that we're thinking about here is that we have a really paradoxical situation where entropy and its traditional formulation are disagreed with because time preferentially selects for certain states. Therefore, the probability of certain states increases through time. And that's not considered in traditional statistical mechanics and theory of entropy. This is just showing the probability of forming a tidy room whenever we continue increases. Because of that, then the likely entropy of the system decreases with time. So if you plotted entropy, the entropy of your system starts at 10 and then decreases to 6, which is completely at odds with the second law of thermodynamics, which is that S always increases. It's not correct if you have selection for knowledge. This relates to the work on themes and why heat death is unlikely to occur. That's the presentation finished, but where I want to wrap up is that entropy is actually right. So it's like in a multiple choice test. If you have two possible answers and you make a mistake that gives you the wrong answer, and then you make another mistake, puts you back to the right answer, you get the right conclusion. The conclusion that is presented in this work is that entropy does in fact increase, but the explanation of just probabilistic dissociation of states is not the right one. That's not what happens. In reality, we have selection for knowledge, but you regain the law of increase in entropy through time because this box has a finite number of states. Therefore, the number of information structures it can occupy is finite. But in reality, our causal influence, so this is the light cone, your causal influence, the volume of information under your causal influence increases with time. So you essentially have a growth operator. In reality. And that means that the number of states that you, as a structure of knowledge, can embody, the number of possible structures, is essentially, so is finite, and then finite plus a growth operator, so function grow. How many information structures can you instantiate if you have a finite structure and an ability to grow that structure? The answer is infinite. infinity. Therefore, the number of possible information structures that can exist in reality is infinite. And by numerical irreducibility, intractability, the volume of information you require, the entropy, so S, the volume of information you require to transform present reality this still increases. Therefore, the second law is infinite. That's me.
Well, essentially what you're saying there is that the reason that there is knowledge and also a second law is because there's enough space for both, like in space, not space as in literal space.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
room for both in
Can you repeat the
I was asking whether it could be summarized to like the idea that the reason that there is both second law and knowledge is because there is enough room in the universe for both. The second law is doing this, kind of like that, but then there's also, because of that sort of supposedly infinite process,
Yeah.
you can have knowledge which doesn't overtake, I guess, the amount of like, information space, right? So like as in,
Yeah, exactly.
it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that knowledge events become overwhelmingly probable all the time and kind of like everything becomes expected more and more and more.
Yeah,
The second law, yeah.
Yeah, no, so you're right to, like, that's not that well explained here. The reason that knowledge always changes and there's always like new room for knowledge is because whenever you create new knowledge, you change your environment.
Yeah.
Every possible finite structure of knowledge is fallible, as discussed last time. Therefore, it's always, the environment's always selectively pressured to be able to overcome the knowledge which is there root of. So you constantly have like a fight between the knowledge that propagates, and that's what means that you explore the infinite set of.
So what you will say is that it's not that a knowledge becomes impossible, but it becomes more difficult with time.
The knowledge that is effective in that environment, like, doesn't exist in the present. It's selected for by evolution in your system. So that means that the knowledge that exists is causally influenced by all the previous knowledge. Therefore, it needs to involve some knowledge which has never existed before that's able to overcome the knowledge that has resulted from the previous evolutionary system. So yeah, it results in like complexity, more effective knowledge in the environment that results from all the causal influence of the history.
Yeah, so just to make this a little clearer for me, so living beings are more than like complex systems in dynamic equilibrium, so that they're not steady and they don't contradict entropy because we still make more. So could you explain how like the process of creation of living beings like responds to your idea of an evolutionary pressure further than just Darwin's, but it's kind of to have like a concrete example.
Yeah, so it's kind of about like Rolf Landauer, the entropy of the system always increases. It's because so you have a person, and then how is that person, because they're increasing in order in some sense, they don't disrupt the fact that entropy increases in the global system. Yeah, that's because, so you have a person, and then they form, the entropy of that person essentially decreases in some sense. They create order to create their body. It decreases, and then, but then the environment has a bunch of entropy, so the environment, and the person processes and interacts with remove entropy, but it's like whatever information is here that's random, whenever the person interacts with it to create more entropy here, whatever like the randomness that was instilled in the person that they were interacting with the environment in order to like mitigate or error correct for, the error correction process sends the entropy information back into the environment. So it's Maxwell's demon, the entropy is then installed in the demon's brain.
I guess I'm just a little bit confused as to how knowledge is at once growing but also losing its significance or like diminishing its scope.
In what way is it diminishing?
Didn't you say that like the knowledge will become less useful? Or like it won't be useful in the future. What is useful?
It won't be useful. Like it's not as if you were put back in the 15th century and Valencia, you probably wouldn't survive that well. You know, but you don't know how to speak their language and you don't have knowledge to propagate in that system. But the knowledge that you have results from all of the like causal influence and world that exists around Valencia. So like, there's a lot of sense in which your knowledge is more impressive than you now have. But it's like every knowledge structure is parochial and followed.
Sorry, going back to what I asked you before, the explanation kind of makes it more clear. There's more, so it's more to it than just the kind of limitlessness of entropy. It's more that knowledge is valuable, so it's kind of fragile enough that it doesn't actually rule out in the way that, like, it doesn't rule out kind of possibilities and therefore decrease the entropy of other states, right?
I don't know if I understand.
No, fair enough.
Do you want to try it? Because
Like, as in, you talk about knowledge being fallible, so, and it being in a propagation process where new knowledge defeats it. And
Yeah.
like, it's not set in stone, it's not permanent. What that means is that, like, just having knowledge doesn't diminish the entropy of future kind of microstates, right? Doesn't decrease it, sorry. Or no.
yeah, it
Yeah.
essentially.
And then uncertainty is still really, really high because that knowledge is fallible in the first place. And that knowledge isn't
Yeah.
you're not kind of moving to a future state of like complete knowledge and no uncertainty at all because of the fallibility of knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. So that's it. So you regain the uncertainty because the knowledge is fallible.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Alright. Any other questions? Yep.
Can you go back to the slide where you show that the entropy and the compatible rule and tightness is increasing as well?
This one or the next one?
The next one, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, for me as a chemist, if I work, for example, with emotions, for example, my needs is thermodynamically unstable.
You're what, sorry? I didn't think.
Let's say emotions, which is example of my needs we use every day.
Yeah.
It's thermodynamically unstable system, but I kind of chemically stabilize it by always know. So it's kind of how I understand it. There will always be high entropy because it's energetically stable state. That's part of when we understand how tightness or how the system will become more inorganic.
Yeah. It's just because this is like a finite system that interacts, that like doesn't have any external interaction. There's one row in this, or there's an update row. The update row states that the next 4 particle positions is completely randomly distributed across this.
Right.
And there's one condition that if the particles all rest on this table, then they just stay. So that's a very finite limited system, and the possibilities are very finite limited.
Right.
But your system probably interacts, I don't understand it well enough, but it probably interacts with an environment that instills randomness, and then that results in like exploration of
Yeah.
genuinely different
But
structures.
usually, like as a chemist, we explain more like about energetic stability of a system.
Yeah.
Then the more, the less energy for the system will be stable. And again, it will go more to untightness. Yeah, that's the part that I think we will need, but yeah, now I understand.
Um, yeah, I was trying to connect this to the complexity lecture from like in evolutionary biology from this day because that's a topic that I love. And the issue is that so we see. I mean, like my hypothesis is that yeah, complexity on Earth as a whole increases. So this means, with this I mean, complexity is a minority thing. It's a minority thing. Mainly, what happens is that diversity increases. I think that that's literally the same that saying that the number of microstates increase in the sense of it's not when we talk about very structural, very low-level features of animals. Yeah, diversity increases, and in that sense, I think that it's the same that microstates is not a very abstract thing. It's not macrostates, I mean. But then I do see that it's like because of the second law of thermodynamics, that doesn't mean that the complexity cannot increase, but that it's going to be minority. But the thing is that it can increase with time, and that's where it was going to get into. So to me, this increasing complexity is the same that increasing in knowledge.
Yeah.
It's going to be minority even, but the thing is that it can thrive even if it's going to be minority.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. So it's like the majority of DNA structures that result in life are really, really small. So it's a massive substrate of DNA, and like the combinatorial possibilities are pretty nuts because you have 4 nucleotide bases in each. The space of structures that result in a functional life are really, really small, but it's because of how evolutionarily advantageous interaction with photons is. We can predict that an alien species would similarly evolve an information structure that causes the creation, potentially through nucleotide bases, of such an unlikely structure. And once it does that, then that's classed as knowledge because the DNA structure that's able to get organisms to do that, those organisms will be more effective at interacting with their environment, so I better pass on the DNA structure. So it's like that's a unlikely state entropy, but it's predictable that once it forms and is embodied in the replicator, that replicator will propagate. Does that answer?
Yeah. It was a very open question too. So yeah, of course. I'm most interested in just finishing this. So I'm very interested in the fact that maybe organisms are so. For example, in Schrodinger's What is Life, and other authors have argued that life, like the key special thing of life is the fight for negentropy, for increasing negentropy inside. I'm very interested also in the sense of in which life also on purpose increases entropy inside itself. And one very nice thing that I love about it. So if when I'm equaling selection pressure to increase of entropy as an effect, is the fact that both like a lot of pluricellular or pluri-individual systems like societies, but also the brain and also the immune system, in very complex animals tend to on purpose run selection pressures on them. So basically, for example, we are born with way more neurons that there will be alive because there's a like it's not a fight, but it's like a selection of between them. And the same with the immune system and with maybe with societies, it's the same. So the thing is that one thing that I love about the way in which knowledge of if we equal to this to complexity can arise and thrive in the future of the universe is that it also takes advantage of entropy in this sense. I wanted to this is just a very personal thing, but I want to try to link it with what you were saying and hear your opinion about it.
Yeah, well, I agree. It gets pretty complicated in terms of like how do you calculate the increase in entropy, and energetics isn't something I necessarily understand, but yeah, I feel like it's the correct illustration. You good? Yes.
Do you mean you said entropy is like instantiated in the brain? You've got sort of, I know that you like personally have kind of more specific views about how that might cash out, and I'm just interested, like, you know, we're at a level of information generality here.
Yeah.
I think it kind of, I imagine you're quite keen to sort of penetrate a little bit more. So when we talk about entropy in the brain and stuff like that, because I'm mostly worried about knowledge structures in the world, which obviously we're talking about like reading that off and something that I have issues with. But for the brain, and like bringing that towards kind of human development, I'm super excited about because I think that reads up really easily.
Yeah.
So I want to sort of, how do you think about that?
Yeah. There's no diagram anymore, but it would be useful. But the information stored in the brain not entropy.
Yeah.
Like entropy is this actually transformation
No,
between
sure.
two information structures. Then like it's predictable that you'll form certain structures throughout your life. I don't know if this answers your question. I'm just explaining essentially the same thing, but technology is with the brain. But the point is that what you formed, if your mom had to predict what things would exist in your brain when you were born, a chair would be pretty likely, even though the formation of that is extremely complex and there's a lot of entropy generated in the universe for you to do that. That's a numerically reducible kind of jump you can make into the future and predict that. But the fact that you have an Apple symbol in your brain, you understand what the Apple company is, or the, I don't know, ChatGPT exists, that's not something your mom would be able to predict. That information, she would never have had that. She couldn't prophesize into the future and say that because it's a numerically irreducible process. The information system that does that. If your mom can simulate that in your brain, she'd probably be making a lot of money. So, but yeah, I feel like does that answer?
Yeah, so that means that kind of knowledge for you is something that is in like the knowledge in the brain maps or represents or maps to like it events in reality with like enough exactness. You know what I mean?
Can you repeat that last thing?
Like you're talking about sort of I have a chair or apple in my brain. So there's like fidelity of that to the event. So I'm sensitive to the entropic nature of reality in some way, and in some way which is because of the structural similarity between my brain and like there's two things going on there. Like, there's one thing which is like I've got a chair symbol, so that's kind of like makes me think of some kind of like substrate similarity between like the thoughts themselves and like. But then also at the same time it's because I'm sensitive. If it's because I'm sensitive to like entropy in the universe or things like that, then is that just because like what's the justification for that? You know, how's my brain sensitive to those kinds of events?
So I think it's a mix between consistency with the environment and self-consistency.
Okay, yeah.
And both contribute.
Yeah.
That's my intuition on this. So yeah, the brain needs to be robust on itself between its parts and dynamics, but also coding with the environment. But you need both, I guess.
Yeah, but that's where information theory comes from. It comes from kind of like trying to naturalize what is like a semantic regularity, like the consistency in the environment, right? So my brain is in an information theorist, even when I'm not doing information theory. It's kind of what's going on, right? I think you're describing basically what we're doing on a fundamental level, and this is a kind of formalization of that. But
Yeah.
this is the process of learning as well as the process of like what you're kind of concluding. If the brain is information theory like this, is that the process of learning mirrors the process of happening.
Yeah.
The projection of events.
And that just means to me that information theory is very pervasive in general, and
That's what I think.
that we have that it's maybe the best paradigm that we have now for explaining everything, basically.
That's what I think. But I expect that.
No, I agree, and the explanation of that is just like, information is just defined as something that has counterfactual potential.
Yeah.
So if
yeah,
some structure that exists in reality is able to be interacted with and have counterfactual potential, it constitutes information. And like, you've never thought about something that doesn't have that property,
You can learn. You can think of things like I guess, Ellie mentioned it the other day, maybe. Was it you? I don't know if it was in this talk, but it was logical language, I guess. Logical truths. I mean, they haven't got counterfactual potential in the slightest.
Yes, exactly.
And they're not informative in the slightest. But
Yeah.
they're very useful in the process.
The only thing I could come up with when reflecting after the talk is if you don't accept this logical language.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
What does it have counterfactual?
It doesn't have
You cannot
logical
negate-
language doesn't have counterfactual logical knowledge of logical truth doesn't have counterfactual potential.
Counterfactual what?
Potential.
Why?
Because
why
if the world is you can't conceive of events where the world is a different way.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
like,
yeah, I know that.
logic is just, you have these statements, and your environment is a structure in which these statements are true. And then logic is like the extensions you can make from these statements to say this is also true. That's what you're trying to do in logic. That's what you're trying to do.
But I built constantly counterfactuals in So I think I build constantly counterfactuals in Python, and
Sure.
that's literally.
If A, then A,
Do you build counterfactuals to
you go
logical?
counterfactual to that. If
Like
A,
for
then
me,
A.
counterfactuals are if this had happened, then this. If else, this
Yeah.
other thing.
Yeah, but can you do the statement if A, then A, the counterfactual?
But why are we trying only to
Because it's a
this?
tautology, because it's tautology.
Yeah, but no, but the thing is that I know, but there's not only a one element in the universe. I never build.
No, but I
counterfactuals.
think the misunderstanding is that logic is not supposed to take place in
It's like a
time
variable.
or in some sort of universe of like time happening in different levels
But I
of
don't
the
need
universe.
time. But I don't need time for
So-
counterfactuals. Like it's like if you are in this place, you will see this color. Else this color. So I only need also like it's space.
But
space
you're not
for that.
assigning any meaning to A. I'm just saying if A, then A. Like if A happens, whatever happens, then A has to
Oh,
happen.
I think.
Sure does.
But
Yeah, I know,
that's
but okay.
I don't understand.
Yeah, no, but I think what he means is, if X equals this, then that. If X doesn't equal this, then that.
Unassigned. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
tautology.
That's the thing. That's the
But
thing. That it's
why
not. It's
tautology?
not.
I don't understand this.
I am me.
But no. But the thing is that why are you saying that counterfactuals? Like, why are you saying are you only using A? Like counterfactual can use every like. You can,
I don't know. Like.
I don't understand this.
I like that's a different discussion about what counterfactuals are, and you're both right. There's different kind of counterfactuals we talked about here. You're talking about modal counterfactuals, you're talking about counterfactuals to, like in propositions, whatever. But the question I was kind of asking here was that I was kind of trying to get to the point I was trying to get to is that we've got knowledge, which is information theoretic, and also kind of mathematical in your last talk. But then we also have other kinds. I was trying to get to other kinds of knowledge about the laws of logic, you might say, for example, which is just not entropic in the slightest. It doesn't rule out any possible, like the world, in every possible world, those things are true. It doesn't rule anything out.
No, like as long as you are.
disagree with that. Like
There's a possible world where the laws of logic are not true.
No, but as long as you advance in knowledge, you understand that axioms are not universal, but depending on a context.
Yeah, domain
So
specific.
you are realizing this counterfactual structure of reality again and again. That's my intuition.
Yeah, but even like if axioms change, equality of a thing to itself is always true.
Yeah, well,
The definition of truth has changed a lot, and the structure of mathematics itself has changed a lot. And Carlos also, like Carlos here, always told me about the thing that mathematicians have had, like more conventions to define mathematical truth and so on. Like the thing is that there's nothing absolute, and I'm not going to be convinced of otherwise.
So that's absoluteness, and what Luca just said is the idea that some knowledge evolves and exists in every possible universe. It's not true because there are infinite possible universes. You can't biject infinite sets, so you can't say that some knowledge structure or what was some like optimal exists and evolves in every system.
How about the knowledge itself that the world is evolving? Like if
Yeah.
that's in the basis of your theory, then it should also
Then we will overcome that in the future. The thing is that you constantly assume that we are here, and that is a justification of that knowledge. There's something absolute in knowledge, but to knowledge, it's more important the evolution and overcoming of the present knowledge than knowledge itself. So you keep clinging to the absolute, but like
Yeah.
we're all constantly overcoming, and knowledge is more about overcoming the previous knowledge.
Yeah, just to answer the question about what was evolution is a feature of every system. It's not true. If you consider the universe to be a Boltzmann box and you reverse all the velocities of the universe, then it'll be anti-evolutionary, and there's an infinite number of information structures that obey that.
So you're talking about counterfactual potential in the possible worlds interpretation. Like it doesn't have to be possible in reality, it has to be possible worlds.
If it's reality is an information structure, and if it's possible in some information structure,
Yeah, some information structure doesn't have to be realized.
so I agree that this kind of weird situation of infinite, the idea of bijecting within an infinite number of realities is the consequence of if you think that there is some knowledge that doesn't have counterfactual potential. But if you reflect on having knowledge and all universes where knowledge accumulates, then that kind of legitimizes the concept of inference. So in some sense, knowledge of, I mean, maybe that's a kind of knowledge, knowing how and knowing that kind of difference, which I more like kind of believe. But as we were talking about earlier, if it's true that what we're learning here is that we're all doing information theory like from birth, we're all kind of excluding possibilities, then our knowledge of inference is true of every knower in all of the universes where there are knowers. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I feel like it does. I don't understand the part about no.
Like, that may be true, what that bit there,
Yeah.
but earlier on we were kind of talking about like how, we're all doing, like, the reason that knowledge can map onto the entropic world is because we are information theorists from birth in the kind of very kind of loose way. And so, as information theorists, we legitimize the concept of information direct inference by excluding possibilities, which means that that's a knowledge that all knowers have. All knowers have knowledge of inference because they use it to accumulate that knowledge of information theoretically. So in all universes with knowers, there is knowledge of inference. So even though it might not project with infinite universes, all universes with knowers presuppose knowledge, or have knowledge of some things.
Yeah, I'll make one point that I didn't teach you. Imagine the tidy didn't propagate and you just have untidy all the time. It's entropically likely that you have evolution of knowledge at like every step. So your space, if possible, is there's many universes may happen, but the space of the probability of that universe constituting a system that doesn't include preferential selection of knowledge constantly decreases with every new second that you have. So it's like it's never going to happen. So that's why I was genuinely wondered why do Rick and Morty pizza words non-exist or pizzas or telephones and that? And the answer was that like the space of genes that would mutate to create a civilization that was more effectively able to exist. I'm just saying that that's not knowledge. So the space of universes which would result in really ridiculous scenarios is it'll just move away from that at every point towards a more.
Not to defend PT, but like why that isn't knowledge, I feel like that's what needs to be kind of like enriched a bit more. But like it's a great, that's a great